We are talking Ghost, written and directed and kind of starring Dylan Brown. And this is a found footage movie of sorts, dealing with a group of Vatican-sanctioned hunters who are out to essentially defend kind of humanity against various demonic cult members and demons themselves that are kind of spreading exponentially thanks to the rise of social media. And it follows a kind of team of these kind of hunters led by a character called Ghost, and Dylan Brown, our director, actually plays kind of the cameraman Monk, who is kind of like has taken a vow of silence, so he is a character, although you don't really see him on screen. Now what will happen to these guys, you will have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss. So a couple of things before we get on to the review. The budget of this one's actually quite low. They had disclosed to me how much it cost, but I won't say. But it is a relatively low budget film. So just bear that in mind. Obviously, it's quite an ambitious movie, but it is a relatively low budget one at the same time. And then just one other thing, and this is really for the filmmakers. I would consider a different name for this movie. I don't think it's going to help having such a generic title, because it just gets lost in search traffic. Even on IMDb, this movie is quite hard to find because it's such a one word generic title. It kind of gets lost, and I do often think that with kind of films. You can, these day and age, when it's so, everything's so digitally kind of distributed, you need to be able to kind of come up and search it. So I would consider a name change. And also, it doesn't really have much relevance to the film, to be honest, outside of being a character's name, which you won't know unless you watch the film. So, anyway, that's my little kind of pre-points to the review. What works in this movie? Okay, so considering it is a low-budget movie, this is a very ambitious movie with, big scope kind of ideas. The idea here that the Vatican is much more kind of like hands-on and kind of a militaristic kind of entity here that deals with the physical removal, shall we say, of kind of demonic threats, and the fact that they're coming up they're coming up like daisies all over the place thanks to social media, I think is an interesting kind of little kind of a little bit of commentary on kind of modern society and things like that. I think it was quite cute. So it's obviously very ambitious with kind of like these grand schemes. The idea with this particular movie is that they're trying the demonic cultists to try and do this kind of reverse exorcism and try and put in this powerful demonic entity into a host, coupled with this host using kind of angelic artifacts as kind of weapons and armor and things like that. So there's lots of ideas here. There's lots of kind of ambition on screen. It's good to see a movie with kind of like trying to create, an interesting kind of an intricate world and kind of mythology that this kind of inhabits. So that's really kind of quite impressive in its own right. It isn't just a bunch of girls running around the house being chased by a monster, which is what a lot of these kind of low budget kind of indie horror movies end up being, to be honest. So it's nice to see something a little different. Fans of video games might enjoy this movie. We have a lot of characters here using kind of like GoPro headcam style thing that gives it this kind of first person perspective kind of view, but like a kind of a first person shooter and things like that. So you have these kind of action sequences like in the latter half of the movie that's kind of will remind you of a video game, and that comes on to the kind of like the action and stuff. I will say again, and this is especially impressive because of the budget, there's some, for the most part, with the little asterisks we'll come on to, the action sequences here are very well handled and are pretty exciting. Like I said, it's all, for the most part, filmed in kind of a first person because you've got these like webcam things on the head and stuff like GoPros. So we see it from that perspective, and it's done pretty well, and it's quite, it's quite impressive considering the budget. We've got a good amount of kind of actors and small parts here of different kind of cult members and things like that, and the action sequences, the gunfights, of which there are, there's quite a few in the second half of the movie, are pretty effective. There's also some nice effects done with the kind of the more demonic side of things. We see a few kind of examples of sort of creatures and things like that, and kind of demons. and we have kind of practical effects for the more overt ones and things like that. You know, they're a little stiff in regards to sometimes they, you know, they're just a little not particularly kind of moving around, but you know, it's a low budget film. But I like, for the most part, I thought they looked pretty good. But one thing I really did like is when we see these like possessed people, and because we're seeing these things through like a camera, we see like a flash of kind of like what they do is they kind of put like a flash of like another image over the top of their faces, so you'll sort of see like almost like a ghostly image of like this thing possessing this person and stuff like that. And it's only like there and gone within a split second, but it gives it this kind of like subliminal kind of horror, if you like, because you can kind of grasp what's kind of possessing them and things like that. So which I thought was a really good idea and effect here. But there are some kind of quite creepy kind of like creature designs, and at the beginning of the movie we get these kind of like these kind of demonic things that sort of pop out and attack in, and it's kind of like a prologue and stuff like that, which I thought was all pretty good. So effects wise and things, again, considering the budget, I have to say it's pretty impressive. And the action sequences, for the most part, with a little bit of one exception, which I'll come on to, I think are kind of well handled and quite exciting and action packed to watch. So that's all pretty good. I quite liked our main sort of character of Ghost and his kind of relationship with Monk, who is essentially our cameraman, who we see the majority of footage. Then we get another female character join called Eve. Those three characters, I sort of quite enjoyed their kind of interplay, and you get a good amount of information, a little bit of backstory from each of them. But that then now transitions into me what I think doesn't work, and it's a good point to kind of move over to maybe what could have done a little better here. We do get a lot of information about our characters, but I think it's delivered in a way which is a little bit clunky. So the first quarter of this movie is essentially all exposition. There is a lot of dialogue being thrown at you, and it's just like exposition dump after exposition dump after exposition dump. And it's a little bit kind of dreary, to be honest. We just told lots of stuff. We have a little bit of a preamble with a little bit of a kind of an action kind of sequence, but then we just have so much kind of dialogue and telling you things about the world, about the mythology of what's going on. And then we get the expo dumps on like the character backstories and things like this, and the relationships. We're told lots of relationships. Ghost's relationship with his ex-partner Simeon, that Ghost's relationship with his father, played by Vernon Wells in a kind of a small role. So there's a lot of exposition in the kind of the first act of this movie, a lot. And I have to be honest with you, I felt my interest starting to wane. So I would have either not had as much exposition, delivered it in different ways, or spread it out through the movie. Because that first act is rough, I'm not going to lie. It gets a little bit kind of dull. As I mentioned, the action sequences are good. Outside of our final boss battle, I don't know if this is because it was the most complex in regards to having kind of like makeup stuff, but we have this big fight with this kind of demonic entity, and the choreography on that is poor. Partially, I think, because they use a sword fight rather than guns, and obviously the actors are taking care not to kind of like wallop each other. But it doesn't look like it's really happening. It looks like it's two people kind of playing with swords, and even before we get to that sword fight, it's just the kind of the way that's put together. I didn't think that particular sequence really worked, and considering that's our big final battle, considering the rest of the kind of the shootouts and the kind of the action sequences, I think were quite well handled. It's disappointing that it ended on such a kind of like a poorly choreographed final battle. As I mentioned, I like the kind of the aesthetics of this creature, but he's not really, you know, he looks a little bit like he's got like this latex mask on and it's kind of hard to move, but I can forgive that. It's a low budget film. The other thing, which doesn't help this movie, I got to say, is some poor acting from some of the cast, particularly the kind of the smaller roles here, really kind of make it seem a little silly at times. It goes to the point where I think some of the acting here it really deflates the kind of the tension, because this is not meant to be a comedy, action comedy. It's taking itself relatively seriously, and then we have these smaller parts. I think our main kind of actors do okay for the most part. It's good enough, but some of the kind of the smaller roles are just not very good, and you know, it's a little bit kind of cringy at times, I have to be honest with you. And I also will say as well, I think some of the dialogue seems a little bit kind of like, it doesn't seem particularly naturalistic. It doesn't seem like people are saying like a natural reaction to things. It sounds like they're kind of like it's from a script and they're just saying it verbatim. Doesn't sound like it's a natural kind of conversation. Again, these are probably, and I'm making some speculation here, probably actors who aren't doing this as a profession. So, you know, maybe you can be a little bit forgiving with that. But again, it kind of deflates that. I mean, if you've got such a low budget, you can't afford, you know, professional actors, I suppose. So I guess that's just a kind of a consequence of having such a low budget ultimately. So it's an interesting and ambitious movie, I think, which builds itself like an interesting kind of world, and I think it's there are certainly parts here which are very impressive considering the budget, and certainly, you know, I'll applaud the ideas behind it and the kind of the world that it's trying to build, but I think the execution of some of the kind of the elements here would have been had a little bit more kind of technical ability behind it, perhaps, or a little bit more kind of pacing and stuff like that with regards to the kind of the exposition dumps and things like that. So for me, it's about an average kind of low budget movie ultimately. So it's certainly a watchable film. I mean, it's a found footage movie, but one other thing I did not like is we're meant to believe that it's a found footage film. But then towards the end, we have like flashbacks, and it uses sequences that were filmed earlier on, but that's a kind of a flashback. I'm thinking, well, that doesn't make sense. There's like we're meant to believe this is a found footage movie, but it's kind of using flashbacks, which doesn't work. I mean, that I would just take that out. And then we have like, you know, we have all these characters who are using these videos, including our bad guys, and it kind of intercuts the bad guys kind of footage as well. So it doesn't really work necessarily as a found footage movie. You see it as more of a, you know, it's just that style. It's meant to believe we're seeing kind of footage that is taken from various cameras. But like I've said, we get footage from bad guys' cameras, and we also have flashback sequences using kind of footage that was filmed for sequences earlier in the movie. Anyway, last point that was. So anyway, it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Watchable, some good ideas, but I think flawed at the same time. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.